and we're all partners in this endeavour. The Big Read is an initiative that runs across our 3 institutions, and we're delighted to welcome students and staff from there, as well as members of our wider communities. All are welcome. For those of you who aren't familiar with what we're doing, the Big Read is a pre-arrival welcome activity for these 3 universities. Every year we gift all the students who are about to start at our 3 institutions a free copy of the same book. We also make it available to students who are already here, as well as to staff members and members of the wider community as well. And the idea is that we're creating a big community, one big book group, and we're giving everybody something in common before they start and giving them something to talk about before they arrive. So we know that it reduces nerves, and when students get a copy of their book, that they're linked with other students and with staff who are already here. Now, the book club is an offshoot of this initiative. We started it actually during lockdown. And the idea was to offer a taster of the kind of teaching that you'd be getting at our various institutions, to involve interesting people to talk about a subject that's related to the book. Our book this year is Professor Hannah Fry from UCL's book Hello World, How to Be Human in the Age of the Machine. And it's a really humane look at artificial intelligence and what we can both learn from it and what we also ought to be wary of, and what we can instruct it to do for us. It's packed with really good stories about how AI works in action and in practical practice, and they resonate with everyday life, and people have really enjoyed it. There are 2 of these book club events. Today's on cars and technology, and then we have one next week on music and art, which will be in person, actually in the townhouse courtyard. And then we have the author visiting us on the 9th of October, and she's actually visiting all 3 campuses of the 3 universities involved. So that's something to look forward to. Now, the subject for today is cars and technology, as I've said. We're becoming more used to the use of technology within cars, that cars are becoming more and more automated, that algorithms are sitting behind the systems that we look at and shaping the way for autonomous driving, and more decisions are being made for us. But obviously there are profound implications for this and dangers as well. And what you might not know is that Kingston is a really great place from which to consider how technology has supported the development of transportation and the automotive engine in particular. Hawker Engineering and the Sopwith aviation company were both based in Kingston, and early test flights were carried out overhead with people just standing underneath watching. So safety considerations of nowadays very little thought about. But this week's seminar is going to look at innovation now with AI and how that applies within this context. We've got 2 really great speakers, both of whom you can see on your screens at the moment. And I'm going to do an introduction as they come to speak. But first, a few housekeeping things. Could we have the next slide, please, Cam? Thank you. So please keep your camera off. We are recording this session. And that's not to be loaded on YouTube, it's for teaching purposes only. So it'll be available to members of the 3 institutions involved via their university websites. If you'd like to ask a question, please put it in the chat function, which is to the side of the screen, and we'll raise it in due course. Or when we come to questions, we'll ask you to put up your hand and then you can raise it yourself. I think that's all in housekeeping. So if we could have the first slide, please, Cam. Thank you very much. And and the next one, please, as well. Thank you. So I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Owen Brearley, who's course leader and senior lecturer at Kingston University, who's got over 3 decades of experience in the creative industries. Now, the use of the word interdisciplinary or intercontextual, intersectional, they all seem to apply to Owen because it's very hard to pin him down. He's involved in many things. His research focuses on real-time simulations, exploring these intersections between drama and digital experiences, but from a human perspective. His PhD is in computational media design from the University of Calgary, so he's Canadian. And he's delved into the questions of how technology can enhance human behaviour. And he's actually come up with an important phrase of his own, which he thinks about AI. And he'd like to move us on from talking about it as artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence by viewing these digital beings as we are, as collaborators to support us on our creative journeys. So over to you, Owen, and would you like your first slide put up, or would you just want to start talking?
Wonderful. Thank you, Alison. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And Cam, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, please. Tech, AI, and cars. Oh, my. Here's the way my brain works. I think, see, and hear in patterns. While I was preparing these slides, I suddenly heard the rhythm of lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, from the Wizard of Oz for some reason. Then, when I reflected a bit further, I realized that Oz was a kind of poetic parallel to the moment we're having with AI right now. We sometimes feel like we are in the middle of a wild and scary AI forest surrounded by lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. Some of us have been dreaming about what life with AI will be like over the rainbow, but when we get to travel to the land of AI Oz and meet characters like ChatGPT, some of us just want to get back home. The Great Oz himself is an apparition that is really just a person behind a curtain who is controlling a machine, and ultimately the answers don't exist with some big green head, but within ourselves. So, for fun, I asked a generative AI tool called Midjourney to create a picture of the Scarecrow from Wizard of Oz as a car. This, what you see on the screen here, is one of the many images that Midjourney responded with, my collaborative. Midjourney is a very eager collaborator, and for every request I make, I get 4 results. But the results weren't perfect, they're far from. Over a few different prompts, we generated about 20 different images, and it took a few minutes, but we eventually got to a place where I had an image that this one was the one that resonated the most for me. So I chose it. The process of selecting the most ideal image is something only I can do. An AI can only provide me with a range of options. Also, Midjourney isn't able to read my mind or make decisions on its own and compose the image that was in my imagination. I had to compromise and accept what the AI could offer me and work with that. AI in cars have a similar dynamic tension that autonomous vehicle researchers are working through. Next slide, please. Cars are tech. When I first read Hannah Fry's chapter on cars this summer, I happened to simultaneously be working with the folks at the Community Brain on some initial plans to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Mini Cooper's win at Monte Carlo. The Mini Cooper, as many of you might know, was innovated here in Kingston. As I thought about it, I realized that when we talk about autonomous vehicles, we intermingle a range of technological innovations that are used to get us closer to success, much like the innovations in the Mini Cooper that allowed for its win. This intermingling of tech is the innovations on the car itself and the innovations of the brains inside the car. The drivers, Paddy Hopkirk and Harry Litton, were masterminds behind the wheel. When we think about autonomous vehicles, there are 2 major systems that are intermingling, and those systems still have some massive hurdles to overcome. This first system is all the methods of sensing, so LiDAR, radar, cameras, ultrasonic sensors, and GPS, and then the computer brains inside that handle all the functions that would normally be handled by a driver, which includes processing all the sensory data, making decisions, making predictions, and knowing where in the world the car is and where it should be going next. When it comes to the brain side of autonomous vehicles, we step into the land of AI Oz. But I think it's important to remember that AI in general is really just a big green apparition of a head. So let's peel back the curtain and talk about AI from the perspective of a term that computer scientists prefer to use over AI, which is machine learning, or ML. Next slide, please. One of the challenges of a term like AI is that it works well for 20-second media sound bites, but it doesn't reflect what's really going on. Many researchers like to point out that we barely know the meaning of human intelligence and how it works. So how on earth can we talk about an artificial intelligence? So AI is used to represent a family of tools that make up the corpus of machine learning. This is machine learning that we see on the screen here. ML is a bit like the massive walls of dials and switches that were hidden behind the curtain in Emerald City. ChatGPT is an easy-to-use interface that cleverly obfuscates those dials and switches, but in a Brechtian moment, I urge you not to be lulled into this suspension of disbelief and start seeing this implementation of machine learning as some great and powerful AI Oz or 21st century oracle. Machine learning is a set of tools that on their own can't really do anything. They need human-generated data to build their knowledge. At its best, tools like GPT or Bard don't know anything more than the collective knowledge of all of us up to the date that the tool was last trained. Training is a massively expensive process, both computationally and in human time, which is why we have things like GPT-3 and then sometime later GPT-4 and much later eventually GPT-5, which is still in the works. All machine learning is learned from the sum of our knowledge, and as such is a reflection of ourselves. Biases, such as using a prompt to ask for a picture of a lawyer, might generate a male attorney, and that exists because the majority of human-created training data is inherently biased, and we have to deal with that. If you have to train the bias out of the data and the bias out of the machine learning. But that can be problematic when you're limiting access to all human knowledge. Who deserve to have access to everything while only others get a constrained view. All of our ML tools are clever messengers delivering responses based on what it's able to model from the data provided to it. Perhaps we ought not to shoot the messenger. The biases we see coming from these tools are just like a reflection of our collective knowledge. They're just a reflection of our collective knowledge. Like a king's jester, machine learning is actually quite good at pointing out our own flaws. If we want different results, we need to ask different questions. So, given that artificial intelligence is not really not all that useful as a term, or at least it is somewhat imprecise, and machine learning is the tools that we're talking about, I'd like to suggest an alternate form of AI, and I'm not alone. Next slide, please. Instead of AI as oracle or big green head, I like to think of AI as augmented intelligence. Augmented intelligence casts us, you and me, in the role of the intelligence part, and our ML collaborators as the augmented part. This particular screen is a screenshot from a YouTube video from Martin Keene at IBM, who walks us through a compare and contrast between artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence. I'm happy to share the YouTube link, but look up Martin Keene. You'll be able to find it. It's a wonderful walkthrough. For me, AI is something that I can use to improve my thinking. It augments my intelligence. Marshall McLuhan discussed the technologies of humans and how we use these tools to make us stronger, faster, improve how far we can see, allow us to see tiny, tiny things, make our voices very loud, or hear incredibly quiet noises. Our family of machine learning tools are just like all those other technologies that came before them. However, because we've stepped into the realm of a new kind of magic, it's easy to forget about the tech behind the curtain. We are temporarily infatuated, which is a dynamic tension of attraction and repulsion with this new oracle. But as we adjust, we will settle down and understand how these tools augment our lives. Next slide, please. When I think about autonomous vehicles, I'm fascinated by the tension between our desire to have a tool that can do all the things in driving that we don't want to do. For example, driving in gridlock, parallel parking, or driving in the dark, or being aware of objects we can't see, or helping us when we're tired or distracted. Ultimately, when I think about AI, I use the mindset that machine learning is there to augment my intelligence. I discover a new kind of freedom. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. For me, the promise of the AI-enabled car is only attractive when these incredible digital tools can make my life better, make my life easier, and enhance my sense of freedom. At its core, my AI ought to be my sidekick rather than my oracle. My driving experience is I drive when it's fun to drive, and my AI sidekick takes over when it's not. Ultimately, that's the experience that we think of when we watch all those lovely commercials about driving and the freedom that it promises. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you. Matt, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Owen. That was really inspiring. And yes, excellent to remember that the Mini Cooper was developed in Kingston as well, and lovely pictures. I think Karen's commented in the chat that your definition for, well, firstly for artificial intelligence as a family of tools, which makes up machine learning, and it not being an oracle, so it's as good as we instruct it to be, and that machine learning comes from the sum of our knowledge. I think you're taking away the fear. And the image of it being something behind a curtain, like the Wizard of Oz, is really helpful. And I think anything that fits into Marshall McLuhan's theories is automatically has a fellow Canadian has a really good resonance. Lovely. Now I'm a big fan of Marshall McLuhan. So Matt, it's over to you now. Would you like your first slide? Now, I'm just going to give an introduction to Matt. Matt is a senior lecturer within English literature, film and media. And I think the best way of summing him up is that he's really prolific. He's published a lot. He's the author, he's an expert in film, and most of his publishing is related to that. So he's edited several important books like the Jaws book, and he's just releasing a book on Jurassic Park. And the next one, he ran a very successful conference on Ken Russell over the summer, and he's just actually going to have some research leave to finish off that book, which is due for publication next year. But he's contributed to a variety of publications on cinema and on particular directors. And so I'd encourage you to look up his various publications, which are listed on the university website. So Matt, can we hand over to you now, please? You're mute, actually.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks, Alison, for that introduction. Thanks to Owen for that really interesting talk, which I really like the idea of this kind of dynamic tension you were talking about, and the kind of disparity between the way sort of our AI is idealized and the sort of realities of it. In the sort of preparation for this talk and for what I was doing, I decided I'm going to be honest, I didn't know much about the Tesla car. So I did a little bit of looking up on the internet about sort of its effects. And since Hannah Fry's book has been written, there are a couple of interesting articles that the Tesla, one incident particularly in downtown San Francisco, these automated cars created by the Cruise self-driving car, not the Tesla, they all broke down and caused a massive, this robot taxi company, they all broke down and caused total chaos on the streets of San Francisco. And the Washington Post reports of the Tesla that there have been so far 17 fatalities and 736 crashes. So it invites you to kind of think that maybe the reality of automation isn't perhaps the gold-plated dream that we think it is, or that's been painted to be. And it kind of ties in with what I want to speak about in this sort of brief talk, really. I guess the disparity between the way that cars, automated vehicles have been present in the cultural imagination, certainly in film, and this talk is going to be much kind of focused around sort of the representation of cars and automation, particularly driverless cars later on in cinema, and the reality. So I'd like to think about the place of the automobile in the cultural imagination and how it, and the car more specifically, the automated self-driving vehicle, has been envisaged in cinema. And in doing so, I also want to engage sort of more broadly a bit later on with the idea of automation and AI in film, and its real-world context. And later on, I'll mention a concept called the singularity. Very interesting concept, I'm sure which you may or may not have heard of. So the aim is really to consider how the motor vehicle has moved from modern to postmodern as well. And this is something that I'm going to think about. So first of all, cars and modernity. Can I flip through two slides, please? That's it. Thank you. So this is a quote from Hannah Fry's book, Hello World. She says, "Our dream of perfect autonomous vehicles dates all the way back to the sci-fi era of jetpacks, rocket ships, tinfoil spacesuits, and ray guns. In the years after the Second World War, a boom period for the motor vehicle, where the UK had enjoyed an extended, or endured, not enjoyed, sorry, endured an extended period of austerity. Broadly speaking, the US, certainly in the 1950s, moved more quickly into a period of consumer affluence, which also saw the automation and electrification of the home, the domestic space. Maybe if we flick on another slide, please. Another one. There we go. Science fiction, film, and television really responded to the sort of automation of the home, the presence of sort of new vacuum cleaners, fridges, refrigeration, etc. Robots such as Robbie the robot here from Forbidden Planet were a direct response to these new electrical goods that were sort of advancing the domestic space, making the domestic chores much more manageable. Robbie was, of course, made of different bits of vacuum cleaners, cathode ray tubes, etc., etc., etc. So he's a kind of composite of these new electrical consumer goods. The new modern living was reflected in sort of images in popular culture, comics, cartoons, science fiction, comics, etc., which envisaged the future as sort of mid-century modern utopia of rockets, flying cars, and high-tech living. And production line industrialization, Fordism, underpinned how US society functioned, from the production of the humble hamburger and the birth of McDonald's to the production of the modern vehicle. I want to return again to this moment shortly, but vehicular movement and the motor car has enjoyed a place in the cinematic imagination since the early days of cinema. And if I can go back to slide 3, I think, please. There we go. Sorry, go on another one. There we go, thank you. Early cinema's engagement with vehicular movement and modernization and modernity may date back not to the car, but to the train and to the Lumiere's arrival of the train at La Ciotat station. The first exhibition of which in 1896 apocryphally saw the attendant viewers flee in terror at the sight of a train about to hurtle through the screen, something unseen before, or so they perceived. This moving vehicle and the apparatus of cinema was set in juxtaposition as illustrations of a new and emerging modernity. And it was the emergence of the motor car that came to, imagistically at least, embody the thrill and anxiety of modernity in cinema. If we could flick on another slide, please. Thank you very much. It's a central component of Fritz Lang's utopian, dystopian future city space in his expressionist masterpiece Metropolis, a vision of elevated highways and imaginative tech vehicles and vertical living. A utopian space countered by the dystopia of the below-ground workers who are ground up both literally and metaphorically by the mechanisms of industrialization. The film, of course, was a direct influence on the future noir of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and its own depiction of the future city. Can I go back to the second slide, please? That's it, thank you. Orson Welles' 1942 follow-up to Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons, engages directly with the birth of the horseless carriage. Perhaps we can argue that this term, the horseless carriage, presents a kind of early version of a driverless car, depending on who you term the driver to be in that sense. If we were to take the horse itself as a driver, and it kind of raises questions over human control. The film also uses the car as a filter or a lens for a new modernity being ushered in by Fordism and the birth of the Model T in 1908. And it expresses anxieties about the old order changing and giving way to new, with the car as an embodiment of the transition to a new, faster, technological, less genteel age. I wonder if we can just show this clip.
I miss my best girl.
We all do. Lucy's on a visit, Father. She's spending a week with a school friend.
She'll be back Monday.
George, how does it happen you didn't tell us before? You never said a word to us about Lucy's going away.
Probably afraid to. Didn't know what he might break down and cry if he tried to speak of it. Isn't that so, Georgie?
Or didn't Lucy tell you she was going?
She told me. At any rate, Georgie didn't approve. I suppose you two aren't speaking again.
Gene, what's this I hear about someone else opening up a horseless carriage shop somewhere out in the suburbs?
I suppose they'll drive you out of business, or else the two of you will get together and drive all the rest of us off of the street.
Well, we'll even things up by making the streets bigger. Automobiles will carry our streets clear out to the county line.
Well, I hope you're wrong, because if people go to moving that far, real estate values here in the old residence part of town will be stretched pretty thin.
So your devilish machines are going to ruin all your old friends, eh, Gene? You really think they're going to change the face of the land?
They're already doing it, Major, and it can't be stopped.
Automobiles are a useless nuisance.
What did you say, George?
I said automobiles are a useless nuisance. Never amount to anything but a nuisance, and they had no business to be invented. Of course, you forget Mr. Morgan makes them. Also, did he share in inventing them? If you weren't so thoughtless, he might think you rather offensive.
I'm not sure George is wrong about automobiles. With all their speed forward, they may be a step backward in civilization. Maybe that they won't add to the beauty of the world or the life of men's souls. I'm not sure. But automobiles have come. And almost all outward things are going to be different because of what they bring. They're going to alter war, and they're going to alter peace. And I think men's minds are going to be changed in subtle ways because of automobiles. And it may be that George is right. It may be that in 10 or 20 years from now, if we can see the inward change in men by that time, I shouldn't be able to defend the gasoline engine, but would have to agree with George that automobiles had no business to be invented.
Okay, thanks for that. It's a really great bit from a wonderful film. But it strikes me watching that the arguments made in that, particularly in that final part of the clip about the birth of the automobile, are the same arguments being made, not just about or that have been made not just about driverless cars, but about AI itself. So it's interesting to place the birth of the car in this context with the sort of the birth of AI at the other end of the spectrum and set them in as kind of two poles. So I want to move on to have a think about cars, automation, and AI from modernity to post-modernity. In her chapter on cars in Hello World, Hannah Fry examines the prospect and reality of a world of driverless cars. Within the chapter, she observes the early and slightly comical efforts of DARPA to pioneer full vehicular automation. An early disastrous and slightly comical attempt at testing the driverless cars ends up looking like, as she herself observes, a scene either from Mad Max or Wacky Races. And it's an interesting comparison which shows the inextricable relationship between the imagined vehicle and its real-life counterpart. If vehicles and driverless vehicles were the embodiment, it were embodied as the epitome of modernity, then the real-life attempts to create full automation is decidedly self-referential and postmodern. These cars, the Teslas, the cruise taxis, etc., are inventions designed and created, of course, by tech developers, scientists, or billionaires who have grown up embedded with this embedded cinematic culture, this embedded sort of imagined cinematic culture. And in these inventions, the real and the imagined coalesce. One might therefore argue that the imagined is in the process of becoming the real, in a sort of Baudrillardian sense. Fry also provides illustrations of the limitations of such vehicles and the necessity of human engagement and presence, as Owen has already illustrated. Western cinema and pop culture has had a long love affair with the automated and driverless vehicle. So let's take a few of the more celebrated examples. Can we click on a couple of slides, please? And again, and again, and again. Thank you very much. Cheers. Here are two of the more friendly examples. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang from 1968, and a year later, Herbie the Love Bug from 1969, the sentient VW Beetle. Both of these exemplify aesthetically a preoccupation with modernity and express the values of the times of the films were released in the 1960s. Released within a short period of each other, the former, based on a children's novel by Ian Fleming, no less, may be contextualized against the prevailing countercultural preoccupation with early 20th century Edwardianism. Again, a period of transition from the severity of the Victorian era to the whimsicality of Edwardian invention and the birth of the vehicle. So these vehicles are seen within almost a kind of utopian light. This is, of course, not only the period which saw the first cars on the road, but what also has been termed the bicycle craze, the popularity of the bikes. See H.G. Wells as The Wheels of Chance, for instance. So it's an era obsessed with moving forward. The Love Bug ends in a road race not unlike the real-life one described by Fry in her chapter. VW Beetles were at the peak of their popularity in North America during the 1960s. Again, the driverless car in the Love Bug, with its friendly, rounded aesthetic, embodies forward-thinking, cultural, friendly, liberal values. We may section, I think when we think about these imagined vehicles, these imagined driverless vehicles, we can categorize them under two labels: the heroic, those embodying the heroic values of their owners. Can we go forward another slide, please? So, for instance, the Batmobile, the DeLorean, or KITT in the TV series Knight Rider, or villains. Can we go forward another one? Stephen King's murderous and sentient cherry red 1958 Plymouth Fury Christine, brought to the screen by John Carpenter. Or even in the early 1970s, go forward another one, please. Another one. Steven Spielberg's the sort of the Jaws anticipating juggernaut in Spielberg's early TV film Duel, both of which present the motor vehicle as a kind of existential threat, expressing anxieties over mechanization and self-actualization. These are in some ways haunted vehicles, in which the human presence has been either reduced to the bare minimum, or which is absent completely. The driver of Jules' enormous belching monster is almost, exhaust belching monster is almost entirely absent. The truck is a sentient, self-automated killer relentlessly pursuing Dennis Weaver's white-collar businessman across the untamed wilds of America. Incorporated within the image are issues and anxieties of an affluent white middle class, terrified of an industrial working class. Their confrontation plays out against the backdrop of a modern American West, a modern American frontier. So the driverless vehicle has this kind of positioning. Can you go on? Oh, yeah, no, it's fine. Leave it as. Concerns over automation and AI run through Spielberg and are expressed most clearly in his 1993 blockbuster Jurassic Park, where the breakdown of automation as a result of both man's over-reliance on it and his hubristic godlike acts of creation propel the existential crises at the center of the narrative. The driverless cars of the park cannot be locked. They break down. They allow guests to escape into the confines of the dangers of the park. The dinosaurs themselves are a kind of childlike Frankenstein AI who, like Hal in 2001, break their programming, and life indeed finds a way. It's interesting as well that Jurassic Park was released in 1993, the same year that Vernor Vinge first offered his theory of the singularity, the idea that AI will eventually, within 30 years or so, he predicted, then extended it a bit, overtake humanity and displace it. So these driverless automated vehicles have had a sort of presence within the sort of cultural imagination in two ways, I think. As a utopian filter for the future, but also as a way of expressing anxieties around issues of automation, industrialization, class, even race to an extent. I'm not really that covered that here then. So I'd like to conclude by again referring to Fry's chapter, in which he details the lack of human engagement in real world, or the anxieties over human engagement, the lack of human engagement in real world driverless vehicles such as the Tesla. Can we go forward another slide, please? This is just an interesting. I threw this in because I thought it was quite an interesting example. This is the Johnny Cab, the automated Johnny Cab from Paul Verhoeven's film Total Recall, in which you have a sort of Baudrillardian facsimile, a simulation of a real cab and a real cab driver, but done in a sort of with a plastic dummy who's programmed to simulate the sort of the mindless or the light chatter of the cab driver, eventually blowing up if you don't pay your fare. So again, it's another sort of interesting representation of this kind of postmodern idea. So these examples, I think, ruminate on the nature of human engagement or lack thereof, and they show a kind of disparity between the, I suppose, the reality and the imagined. So I think I'll leave it there and I'll hand back over. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Matt. And those images are wonderful to look at and bring back sort of existential crises like the Jurassic Park when it breaks down in the middle of the film and you know that they have no way of driving it back. I think you've also given us...
Can you just go back one last slide there?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna,
yep.
So just go back to the one before. Sorry, I meant to though. This is the Tesla. As sort of the kind of the postmodern and the postmodern sort of aesthetics of the Tesla, which kind of incorporate the sort of gull wings of Back to the Future's DeLorean, and the sort of sci-fi kind of interface of the cinematic sort of car in its dashboard. So I think that's a good example of sort of the idea of a kind of science fiction seeping into reality and sort of science fiction becoming reality.
Yes.
So that.
No, thank you for mentioning that.
It kind of depends on the branch of science fiction you go for, because in many ways the early days of the Apollo, all the switches and dials and things that you see in the capsule, that was very science fiction, and it needed to have that complexity. And it's sort of fascinating how we've moved along the path into this like minimal interface and minimalism in our science fiction. So I take your point. It's great. It's fascinating how tastes shift over time.
Yeah.
But one of the things you're saying is that these cars are part of our cultural imagination. We're familiar with what driverless cars look like, but the figures that go with it, if we've had 17 fatalities and 737 crashes, is this something that we should be responsibly pursuing?
I think
Owen, Owen or Matt?
Oh, sorry. I was caught up in reading Kara's comment. Alison, please share with me again. What was you were asking?
Well, Matt was saying that these cars that he's shown is a part of our cultural imagination, and that we're used to seeing driverless cars on the screen, and yet if the figures you gave us were that the Tesla has correlated with 17 fatalities and 737 crashes. So is this something that is responsibly developed?
Well, I think, all technologies are going to rack up certain challenges over time. I mean, the car is not a flawless technology. And so what's fascinating to me is when we look at Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, or we look at Herbie the Love Bug, those are the friendly sidekicks that are kind of the smart butler who can predictively know what the needs of its humans are, and it sort of takes care of and looks after. And then we have the sort of dystopian version where you get the cab that will blow up on you if you don't pay, and Total Recall, and that sort of moment of I'm running into technology again, and we all have those moments where you know, the interface is overwhelming and the performance isn't what we were hoping for. And it goes right down to our just trying to pay for a coffee sometimes, just walking up and tapping my card, and the card doesn't tap. So I use my phone. The phone doesn't tap properly. So I use my watch. And eventually I reach into a pocket, pull out a bill and give it to the person, right? There's sort of, I have my old man shaking fists at the sky at times with technology, of course. And that's just the way it works, right?
Yeah.
Matt, do you want to respond to Cara's question on film? How do you think film has helped and or hindered how we're trying to use artificial intelligence in cars now, or machine learning in cars now? How do you think film has helped that process?
I think it's an interesting question, because on the one hand, as I sort of mentioned in my short talk there, people who are developing this technology, this material, are people who have sort of themselves grown up with a kind of idea of fantasy, you know, and they're trying to bring a fantasy into a reality. Okay. But the reality is very different to, I mean, there's nothing behind the fantasy, it's just an image, and it's trying to put something behind that fantasy to make it work. Okay. But on the other hand, it has prompted, these kind of images have prompted, or maybe seem to have prompted sort of advances in technology, you know, things that we could be, you know, could be. So I think it's a bit of both. I think it's both hindered and helped.
And also the fantasy feels so real, doesn't it? Because we're watching it on a big screen, so it feels like it's true. Turning to Owen, Baz's question is a good one. He says he really likes the idea of augmented intelligence, so using technology to augment his own development and consciousness rather than expecting oracular wisdom from it. I mean, that was very much the line you took, wasn't it? It's as good as we make it, Owen.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, so just as a fun fact, I was curious to see, because Matt, you were referencing some history of sort of where we were getting storytelling from. And I thought, well, how old is the ChatGPT concept? And GPT itself, GPT 3.5 came out in 2022, so that's and so I of course looked it up quickly, and we're looking at the 1950s for the first large language model. An implementation of this idea was created in 1966 at MIT in a program called ELIZA. And so, you know, suddenly we have this predictive text thing coming out, and these large language models were devised as a way of augmenting my way of finding information, and so, you know, I think with all technology, we kind of go through this infatuation period where this thing is going to do all the things and fix all the problems for us that we thought it was going to, and then suddenly it's, oh well, you know, it's helping. I mean, I would much rather climb into a car than have to ride a horse, and I would much rather ride a horse than have to walk some days. And so, you know, it's the, I think when we accept that everything we have is there to help us, if we choose to let it help us, then that's fantastic. The trick is we sometimes fall into the place of it gets abused, and that's where all of those great discussions around the ethics and the morality of the use of AI and the challenges of what an AI augmentation will have. But every technology has had that same ethics discussion around it, right? What is the ethical use of a car? What is the ethical use of an airplane? What is the ethical use of dynamite, right? Oh, you muted, Alison. That's okay.
Sorry.
I can read you
where does cost come into this, though? Because we are in a difficult economic situation, and we're part of a world that's always wanting to outsource things and ever reduce costs. And you can see this playing out in industrial relations, can't you? Union debates over how many drivers and how many other people should be on trains and buses.
Yeah.
So could you just say something, perhaps Owen and then Matt, about where cost comes into considerations of AI, when cost is a pressure?
Well, one of the things that is possible with in terms of again augmenting my travel plans is there is the potential of we use Google Maps now to travel, and Google Maps is being updated with live data in terms of where vehicle stoppages are and traffic jams and those sorts of things. So how can I avoid gridlock? How can I what is the best time to travel? Do I need to leave 15 minutes earlier? As we look at more and more intelligence in vehicles, we're looking at how do those vehicles communicate with one another so that we can start to have things like zipper merging working properly, and rather than somebody being rude and just pushing their way in and causing more traffic problems, it's there's this vehicle to vehicle communication, which is super interesting. I did my own. I was part of a research team where we explored the notion of using AI to connect to Bluetooth. Using autonomous vehicles to connect to Bluetooth so that they could alert the pedestrians around them of what's going on in the environment. And so I think part of the cost consideration is just how to use that resource better, and not necessarily remove the humans out of it, but how do we empower the humans to do their job, their work more efficiently, more effectively. We're already seeing stories about driverless cabs that don't know how to obey a police officer. I mean, there was this hysterical meme that went around recently where the passengers are in the car going, and it's a driverless, and the police person's like, you need to pull over, and the vehicle doesn't know how to respond to a command like that. And so it's all these things that we try to predict and we try to think about and model and plan for, but then reality hits and we go, oh, okay, hadn't expected that, let's go a different direction.
And it's left the human unskilled. I mean, Hannah Fry had a very good example of an all singing, all dancing computer keyboard in an aeroplane, but when the unexpected happened, the pilot was no longer knew how to operate it because they were so used to everything happening automatically. So there are big consequences. Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not half as well versed in the sort of more technical sides of this as Owen is. But when we're thinking about costs, one of the things that struck me just off the top of my head was that you have these automatic driverless cars run by AI being sort of created. So how do you reduce costs in production? Oh, well, we don't need humans to do it. Why don't we have AI to produce automatic cars? And boom, you're halfway towards the singularity, right? Because you've got robots building robots.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's the rise of the machines, right? You don't have to pay them.
Yeah.
So I mean, which kind of wants to ask Owen this actually. Where do you stand on the issue of the singularity?
Well, I think.
Can you just explain what you mean by that before you answer the question?
Yeah. So the singularity, I mentioned it briefly in my paper, was a theory or an idea presented by a computer scientist, wasn't he, Werner Vinge, and I think was he at MIT or something like that?
I think so.
Yeah. That within
or Stanford, maybe.
Stanford, I think it was. Yeah, 30 or 40 years, the artificial intelligence would have evolved to the point where humans are no longer necessary, and basically they will evolve us out of existence.
And that's what you mean by singularity.
Yeah.
Okay, so Owen,
That's the idea, kind of boiled down to a sort of, because it came out in the same year as Jurassic Park, which I think is quite interesting, because that's what that's about. It's about an AI which kind of evolution evolving to the point where.
Well, I think the thing from my perspective is if AI is able to answer the difficult questions that we're currently struggling to answer. If AI can come up with a definition of truth and beauty and justice that blows the doors off of anything a human ever created, then we might be approaching the singularity. But I think we've got a fair distance to go yet. I think 30 to 40 years is very optimistic, because again, and as I had said before, we can barely define human intelligence. How do we define meaning and meaning making? And so until we're there, and until an AI comes along and can give that to us in a way that we go, ooh, wow. But at the moment, everything that I see coming from an AI or from machine learning is derivative.
Yeah.
And it's the human who must move it from its derivative form into the transformative form.
It's an interesting sort of philosophical question, isn't it? To have a fully functioning AI, it must have to be entirely self-aware. But at the same time, it's based on humans, and humans are still thousands of years later still trying to work out the meaning of existence. Right? We still don't know what it is. And that's changing all the time. Do you know what I mean? It's like we still. I mean, the answer is clearly 42, right? But I mean,
that's a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think that's probably a really good place to leave it. This sort of philosophical, unknowable nature of humanity. I hope you've really enjoyed today. It's been a really interesting session, raising some very big issues with some very familiar images, which are taking us down all sorts of additional paths. Next week, Owen mentioned whether AI could ever come up with truth and beauty, and we're tackling that head on next week in a live session in person, which will be held in the courtyard at Kingston, and it'll be on art and music, where there are very profound considerations about whether AI, what the role that AI plays in the creation of art and music. And it's just a couple of weeks ago that, in fact, an AI band was given a contract by a music company for the creation of music. So that's an interesting statement. You're left with a fun fact, which was that what is the connection between Ian Fleming, Bond, and James Bond and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is a very good pub quiz question. And so it's Ian Fleming wrote both of them. I'd forgotten that. And then after the next live one, which is next Wednesday, we asking you to look forward to the event live again in the Townhouse Courtyard for Kingston and at the other two institutions involved. We all have a live event with Hannah Fry, the author, who's coming to talk to us. So lots to look forward to. But I hope this has given you a taste of the kind of philosophical debates that are going on at Kingston and the kind of teaching that we offer in all three institutions involved. I wish you a very good day and thank very much Matt and Owen for such a stimulating session. Thanks very much
Alison.
indeed.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks,
Cam has
Alison.
just pointed the link to sign up for the art and music, and also you should be getting events from your institution to sign up for the live author event, which is following. Thanks very much indeed.